We are living in some extraordinary times here. Truly, it feels like a moment between worlds, the old world and the new world. But humanity is remembering what it once knew and somehow forgot. For centuries, we have been moving through an age of separation, separated from nature, separated from our bodies, from one another, and from this deeper wisdom that lives within all of us. But we feel an ending coming, right? We know an ending is coming. Well, we know because we feel it, but the other thing is numerology calls this the 9 year. And every ending carries a seed of a new beginning. Even the cosmos is revealing something to us right now. I'm not an astrologer, but I know enough to know that Saturn completing its passage through Pisces and Pluto moving into Aquarius, that we're standing on a threshold moment of collective rebirth, right? Where old structures are dissolving, the structures out there and the structures within us dissolving, and a new form of consciousness is beginning to rise. So while everybody is talking about this great awakening, I'm telling you, this is the great remembering, the stage after the awakening, when remembering begins. It's that return to something within us all, the core of our knowing. It's the return of the feminine principle within humanity, not feminine as gender, right? But as this sacred intelligence of creation, this force that is restoring harmony and balance and belonging. Everything is unfolding in the skies right now that we see is like a mirror and a message. There's some weird, strange things happening, but we're not afraid. In fact, we welcome it. This reflects what is awakening within all of us. It's like a call to come home to ourselves, to the pieces that we've forgotten or given away, to the parts that have been suppressed by society and the system, right? And within each of us, there's something ancient that is coming up, like a knowing as if we've lived through this before, a deep remembrance. There was a time when women were the keepers of the stories and the cycles and the medicine. We were the midwives, the herbalists, the astronomers, storytellers, the warriors. We were leaders. And we were trusted and looked to for the answers and guidance. Our knowing came through our bodies, through the land and through the sun and the stars, and through direct communion with life itself. And then came the forgetting. Like around maybe the 12th, 14th, 15th, 17th century, somewhere around there, thousands of people, most of them women, were executed during the witch hunts. Entire communities and villages turned against their healers. So what was once sacred had become criminal and evil. The intuitive and the embodied were looked at as dangerous and demonic. Even women in communities who chose to be unmarried, who wanted to be single, they were successful. They were running businesses. They were funding institutions, they were being burned at the stake as well, because there was no way that they could have accomplished all that they did on their own. It had to have been witchcraft. Matriarchal communities where these women gathered together and pulled their resources together and helped others around them, they were torn apart. And women had to either flee or were burned. So the message was clear. Your wisdom cannot be trusted unless it was connected to a man. So generation after generation, we learn to hide our gifts and silence our intuition and shrink our visibility, unless, of course, it was to catch the eye of a man to save us from ourselves. Then around the 18th and 19th century, women in much of the Western world had been written out of ownership and law itself, right? A wife was legally her husband's property. She couldn't vote, you know. And in many countries, it wasn't until the 1970s that women could open a bank account on her own or get credit of her own without needing her husband to co-sign. It feels literally like they're trying to take us back to that time. That was the institutionalization of forgetting, codified in law and culture. So while they're not burning us at the stake anymore, that flame of suppression, it still burns within our psyche. And we gave that over to our daughters as well. The wisdom of the feminine, the gift of our inner knowing, was not simply silenced, it was systematically dismantled. A world that once revered the cycles of life began to call logic superior and intuition faulty. In the book, The Women Who Run with the Wolves, Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes, she writes, every woman carries within her the bones of an ancient wild creature, the instinctual self that knows how to see in the dark, how to heal, how to create, how to protect life. Over centuries of suppression, that wild self was starved, it was buried beneath the roles we had to play and the rules we had to follow and the religion that demanded our submission and our obedience. So when we think about all of this, we think about the witch trials and the property laws and the silencing and the restrictions on bodily autonomy. They're not just historical events. They're mechanisms to sever women from their instinctual knowing, to make us doubt our inner compass and to domesticate that wild soul within us. And so the forgetting becomes internalized. There's always that quiet voice that says, pull back, be quiet. You need to play it safe. But again, Dr. Estes reminds us, the bones remember. La Luba sings over those bones. The wild woman never dies. She only waits for us to return to her. The great remembering is not just a spiritual idea. It's a historical necessity. Because until we acknowledge what was taken, we cannot fully reclaim what was ours to begin with. Across this country and the world, something magical is happening. Even in the midst of chaos, something beautiful always emerges from chaos. The feminine is rising. She's stirring again, like stirring that pot. This is not the rise of something new. It's the return of a rebalancing that touches systems and stories and our souls. We're watching the great remembering unfold as we go into 2026. I was reading the book When God Was a Woman by Merlin Stone. Groundbreaking book. And she reminds us that there was a time when humanity worshiped a great goddess, the creatress of life, the mistress of heaven. And at the dawn of civilization, the divine was feminine. She was relational. She was embodied. She writes, in the beginning, people prayed to the creatress of life, the mistress of heaven. At the very dawn of religion, God was a woman. She revealed that as the patriarchal system gained more control and dominance, these goddesses were dethroned, their temples were destroyed, and their stories rewritten. The sacred feminine was not only suppressed in society, it was just completely exiled from divinity itself. And with that erasure came a distortion that still defines much of modern culture. The belief that creation belongs to what is controlled, to power, not love. But we know that history is cyclical. The goddess never disappeared. She might have went underground, waiting for the world to remember. And now she's rising up through us, through the ways that we create and lead and parent the next generation and speak the words that we use. Through every woman reclaiming her body as a holy ground, her intuition as intelligence, and her emotion as truth. This is a feminine resurgence, the rebalancing of spirit and structure, intuition and intellect, being and doing, the masculine and the feminine. It is the healing of polarity and the return of wholeness. The feminine is re-entering the world through culture, through creation, and through consciousness itself. And make no mistake, what's returning will change everything. This is why it is not just only a rebalancing, it is also a revolution. But like I've always say, there is no social revolution without a personal evolution. The wild woman leader is the living bridge of this transformation. She's both ancient and emerging, a leader and a healer, a truth teller who carries the memory of the goddess and the vision of the future. 2026 is the great remembering, the era of the wild woman leader. So if the great remembering is the revolution, then leadership is the healing. Now, not in the way we've known leadership for all of this time, right? That was an imbalance of power, right? That brought us in balance. And that imbalance, it didn't just distort institutions, it distorted us. It separated masculinity from its divinity, its sacred capacity to protect and build and serve life. We've corporatized it, we've vilified it, we've made it so one-dimensional. And so now people are asking, what does leadership look like when it's in service to humanity? That is the question. That is the heartbeat of the new era. Leadership as the healing begins with remembering that society is not just systems and rules, it's a living reflection of who we're becoming and how we're evolving as humans. So ask yourself, what kind of society do you want to live in? What kind of world do you want to live in? We heal when we listen. We heal when we create spaces for our voices of truth, for all voices of truth. We heal when we stop replicating the very systems and hierarchies we say we want to dismantle, but yet we recreate them in our organizations. Organizations that were built to fight against this. We love to build new things, but they aren't new if we're building it with the same materials, the same mindset of the system we're here to disrupt. Leadership in this era is about designing and architecting communities and workplaces and environments where others can thrive. This is the call to the new leaders of the great remembering, to become cultural healers and visionaries and architects of belonging, to understand that systems don't change until we do. So true healing leadership is going to require three things from us: courage, capacity, and consciousness. The courage to face what's been broken, capacity to hold complexity without collapsing, and consciousness to lead from integrity. I'm calling this the life-death life cycle. Now, this comes from the Women Who Runs with the Wolves, and her idea around it was completely different, but I see it as we are at the end of that first life cycle, and we're going through the death cycle. So we are going to need saweras for the death cycle. That comes from The Awakened Woman by Dr. Tarari Trent, to help us mourn what we have lost and bury all that is gone and that is dead. And then we need the midwives to take us into the new life cycle. This is why the feminine revolution matters. Because when women rise as leaders, and we probably won't even be using that word again in the future, we'll be using words like midwife, facilitator, guide, right? But when women rise in these roles, understand they don't do it to lead organizations. They do it to lead society back to wholeness. They remind the world that leadership is something that we nurture. This is how we begin to heal what has been fractured. We first heal the self, then we step up and lead the healing with courageous hearts in our communities with one another, in our families, because no one heals the world alone. The healing begins in conversation and gathering in circles. We do it together. And that's why I'm hosting the Remembering Circle on Saturday, October 18th at 11 a.m. The registration link is in the description box. But the Remembering Circle is a process that will be a part of the Wild Woman Leaders community. Once a month, we will go through that remembering process, bring us back to ourselves so we can show up in this new era as our true, full selves. remembering parts of ourselves, remembering our identity, remembering our bodies, remembering our voices, remembering our ancestors. When we heal, society heals. When society heals, the world remembers itself again. This is your invitation to join us on October the 18th. Because remembering is what moves us into revolution. I truly believe that.